Now with a fish-only aquarium, you've got quite a different approach. With a fish-only aquarium, you tend to have a much higher stock of fish in the aquarium because you don't have the corals and so forth to also maintain interest. With a fish-only aquarium, temperature is not so much of a problem because the fish are more tolerant to higher temperatures than the corals are. The other addition is copper. With a fish-only aquarium, you can easily introduce various medications such as copper to aid any sorts of parasitic problems that occur in your aquarium, therefore making it somewhat easier to look after. The other thing is that phosphate and nitrate, basically lower level wastes, don't tend to be as much of an issue because the fish are not as sensitive to phosphate and nitrate as the corals are. So you can put a much larger load on the aquarium without being so worried about the phosphates and nitrate levels. The phosphates and nitrates will of course cause algae, but providing you have quite a few algae grazing fish and you are prepared to clean the tank with a simple algae magnet, that really shouldn't be too much of a problem. The overall outlook of a reef aquarium versus a fish-only tank is really strikingly different. In most circumstances with a reef tank, people tend to have a whole lot of rock, very busy, lots of corals, lots of rock. On the other hand, with a fish-only tank, they tend to have it a lot more sparse, with a higher population of fish and a much more spacious, let's say, clean-looking tank. It does tend to require a little bit more maintenance. You do tend to do a bit more glass cleaning, and you do tend to have more filtration on the aquarium. With a fish-only tank, filtration is a major key. You're really trying to have as much filtration as you can. On the other hand, with a reef aquarium, the live rock really is such an integral part of your filtration that the filtration you add to the aquarium is really supplementary. With a fish-only tank, filtration is pretty much the bigger the better. The more filtration, the more capacity you have, the more fish you can keep in the tank, and therefore the more interesting the tank tends to be. Water changes are also much more important with a fish-only aquarium. Because you've got a lot more waste being produced, there's a lot more low-level waste that you do need to deal with. So water changes are really the simplest and quickest way of exporting these lower-level organics out of your aquarium. Now once you've decided whether you're going to keep a reef aquarium or a fish-only aquarium, you've really got to consider your options on how to decorate this tank. It's a really good idea to try and grab some books, look on the internet, or go and see as many tanks as you can to try and get some ideas on how you want to decorate your tank. Now as far as a reef tank's concerned, it's pretty simple. You're after trying to create elevation for your corals so you can allow your corals to get up closer to the light. As far as decorating a fish tank's concerned, live rock is still probably the best means of decoration because of its filtrational benefits. But if the live rock just isn't available, go for the tougher rocks, which is the limestone rocks. If that's not available, then you need to consider other options, such as sandstones and volcanic rocks. But wherever possible, go for the calcium carbonate based rocks, which also help the pH of your aquarium, as does shells and dried corals, so you can actually get dead coral pieces, which you can use as well to help decorate particularly fish-only aquariums. So look at the options that you've got, and wherever possible, go for calcium carbonate-based structures because they are the most natural and they do aid in your buffering capacity. When decorating the aquarium, try and be conscious not only of trying not to make too much contact with the substrate, so trying to put the rock on points instead of flat, but also try and make your structure as porous as possible. Try and decorate your rocks so then you're getting plenty of elevation without soliding up and clumping up the rocks and creating dead spots. If we can get our rocks, we can make bridges and structures which allow us to gain elevation without too much mass, allowing better water flow and more caves, good little hidey holes for the fish. If the fish is stressed and it feels open and vulnerable, in general its stress levels will maintain higher. On the other hand, if the fish is able to duck into a dark little cave where it feels safe, you'll find that its stress levels lower much quicker. Now you're really going to have to find out what substrates are actually available to you. There's marble chips, there's aragonite, and traditionally coral sand is the most popular. as well as shell grit. But finding out what ones are available to you is definitely an issue, because there's more and more bans on the collection of a lot of these substrates because of environmental impact. So what you're after is a fine layer of a fine substrate. Make sure the substrate's not too fine, otherwise it will tend to collect anaerobic bacteria and will also get blown away with your pumps, because we're really after a good amount of water flow in the aquarium, and if your substrate's too fine, like any sort of sand, which will just get blown away by the pumps. So any 1 to 3 millimetre fine white substrate really looks the most natural. I really find it safest to have a very thin layer of substrate, because the thinner the layer of substrate, the less detritus tends to build up in the substrate. So if you've got a very thick layer that's forming a lot of anaerobic bacteria in the deeper layers, and you've got some fairly big, large rocks in the aquarium, which is lowering the oxygen level within the substrate, you're definitely at risk of hydrogen sulfide, particularly if you move that rock and disturb that coral sand. And this hydrogen sulfide can actually come up into the aquarium. It's a very toxic gas which can actually kill the fish. Some more experienced hobbyists do choose to use the thick sand beds, whether that's run with a plenum or purely a thick sand bed, or even divided substrates where you've got a larger grain of substrate and then a finer grain of substrate on top, often divided by a fly screen. That's fine if you want to use these methods, and they can be used to reduce nitrate, so offering more denitrification, but do take heed to the risks of these sorts of systems. If the anaerobic bacteria is forming because it's starting to choke up with mold, and then you're getting releases of hydrogen sulfide, it can crash your tank. On the other hand, if you are a more experienced person, or you're getting guided by a more experienced person, you can think about using these deeper sand beds for the purpose of reduced nitrate. Live rock is probably the most important part of a reef aquarium. What happens is when you put the live rock into the aquarium, it imports into the aquarium all the different microorganisms which will act like the worms in the compost heap with your natural ecosystem you're trying to create. Basically what the live rock is dead coral. When the coral dies away, what is left is calcium carbonate. The calcium carbonate works like a safe haven for various microorganisms, corals, algae and bacteria. So what's live about the rock is not the calcium carbonate, because that was once a live coral. It's actually the different bacteria which grow within the rock, the microorganisms and corals and algae that grow on the rock. So when you put this live rock into the aquarium, you'll get a multitude of microorganisms: amphipods, copepods, Bristol worms, pistol shrimp. These little organisms will run off the rock and eat the excretions of the fish. The fish will also produce ammonia, as will the microorganisms. So on the outside of the rock, you'll get the formation of a heterotrophic bacteria, which will break down high-level organics, as does the fish's digestive system. On the outside of the rock, there's a lot of oxygen present, so therefore you'll get nitrifying bacteria, which mean they're breaking high-level waste into low-level waste, being nitrate. Within the porous structure of this rock, you'll form denitrifying bacteria. Now, these denitrifying bacteria break your nitrates into nitrogen gas, which just precipitate harmlessly into the atmosphere without odour. When purchasing live rock, what you're really looking for is the shape of the rock. Pay little attention to the colour or what's on the rock, because inevitably that's going to change. So what I'm looking for is good, easy shape, not too many boulders. If you've got a whole tank full of very roundish rocks, you'll find a lot less opportunity to put the coral. On the other hand, if you're going to have rock with a lot more shape to it, it'll be a lot easier to anchor the corals within the rock. It's really important when you're positioning your rock not to lay them flat, because basically your contact with the substrate is going to determine how much detritus you build up in your aquarium. So if it's flat on the bottom, you get a lot of gunk building up around the bottom of the rock. On the other hand, if the rock was positioned on points, then the amount of surface area contacting the substrate is much lower, and that's where your detritus builds up. So the garbage doesn't build up around the rock itself, because there should be ample water flow in the aquarium. The garbage builds up at the base of the rock. One excellent tip with aquascaping is the use of a shelf. What the shelf does is minimise your contact with the substrate. So instead of using large boulderish type pieces for your support structure, what you can actually use is this shelf. We will then go mounding the decorative pieces of rock around the shelf, preferably hiding the shelf, and just using this for our support. From the time that you put the rock in, it will go through various colour changes. It will go often through a powder brown stage, which is the diatom phase. It'll often go through a hairy green algae phase, but what you're ultimately aiming for is a coralline algae phase. Now that's signifying that the rock is very well developed and established. The colour of your rock will be very much determined by the water quality of your aquarium. If you have a lot of phosphates and maybe not as high calcium level, your rock may be all hairy green. On the other hand, if your rock is very high in calcium without much phosphate, you'll get a lot more coralline algae growth, which is really what you're aiming for. It is quite wise to use gloves. When handling the live rock, it's not uncommon to find mantis shrimp. They'll often pop out and land in the bottom of your box. If you do find them, don't handle them. Use a net and discard of them. Don't put them into the aquarium. Same as most crabs that you find. It's best not to put those crustaceans into the aquarium, because as they grow up they'll often cause trouble, particularly the mantis shrimp. Though something like 98% of them are absolutely harmless and just good scavengers, there's certainly been cases of them attacking fish, as they are predatory. Once you've got your live rock, it's a really good idea to visualise what it is you're trying to achieve, and then you're ready to put it in the tank. While you're enjoying creating your masterpiece, don't forget to do a tap test, which is simply tap quite firmly on the rock as if you were a large grazing fish, just to make sure that your rocks are secure. This particular aquarium divides a bedroom and a lounge room. It's equipped with metal halide lights, which are responsible for this natural light shimmering effect. There are many different options as far as lighting is concerned. A lot of the time it's not really what's right or what's wrong, it's really what's relevant for the corals that you choose to keep in your aquarium. Now, providing different light sources in the aquarium wouldn't be unlike different positions within the ocean. You've got some corals that come from very shallow water that want very high intensity lighting. Then you've got medium and then deep water corals, which really don't require as much light. So the key is to really know what light it is that you're providing over the aquarium, and make sure you consult with your aquarium expert. It's just really important that you know what the requirements of the corals are that you choose to keep. Particularly with large aquariums, what I'll really try and do is offer as much range of lighting as possible. Therefore, you're more likely to be able to keep a more diverse range of corals. For example, if you've got 3 metal halides over your aquarium, don't have 3 of the same metal halide. Maybe have one 20,000 K bulb, one 14,000 K bulb, and one 10,000 K bulb, because you will find that various corals will grow better under the different types of Kelvin ratings. This particular tank has a combination of metal halide and fluorescent tubes. this is a really diverse and popular choice. What a lot of people will do is actually stagger their lights coming on and stagger their lights going off, which not only creates interest, but also simulates the natural sun-up, sun-down effect. So maybe they'll turn their blue actinics on in the morning, then stagger on the lights during the day until all the lights are on, simulating the middle of the day, then stagger their lights going off, ending with the blue ones going off late at night. As far as lighting duration is concerned, you're really trying to replicate a natural day. So you want to have a maximum of 12 hours of fluorescent light, and then with the metal halides, you're really only trying to run them for about 6 to 8 hours, which is emphasizing the middle of the day when the sun is at its peak. A very overlooked point that a lot of people get trouble with is forgetting to replace their light tubes. It's a really good idea to either document in your logbook when you've purchased your light tubes, or even just write with a texter on the light tube, because with time the lights do lose intensity and spectrum. In general, we try to recommend that we replace the fluorescents every 6 to 9 months, and that we replace the metal halides about every 12 to 18 months. So don't forget, the tubes are losing intensity and losing spectrum, so if you find over a period of time your corals are just not doing as well as they used to, I really recommend replacing the lighting. Particularly with these totally encased hoods, you really need to be conscious of temperature. So try to ventilate this area as much as possible, especially with metal halide lighting. So make sure the metal halide lights are about 30 centimetres off the surface of the water, and make sure they're in a very well ventilated area. This often means that you do need to install exhaust fans to suck out the heat.